Oi, tudo bem? A gente está aqui com mais um Summit Tech. Hoje, mais uma palestra internacional, né? A gente trouxe uma pessoa super especial. O Summit, como um todo, para quem não conhece, ele acontece anualmente em São Paulo, 2 dias de evento. Esse ano a gente teve que se reinventar e trazer várias coisas diferentes, então a gente está trazendo o nosso palco de tecnologia também para o online. Então, tem uma série de palestras que estão acontecendo aqui com foco em tecnologia para todo mundo que curte. E hoje a gente traz, na verdade, duas pessoas, né? Uma delas é o Yuri Ramos, que é diretor do MIT, nosso parceiro, que eu vou chamar o Yuri aqui para ele contar um pouco dessa pessoa que a gente está trazendo e um pouco desse conteúdo de hoje. Oi, Yuri.
Oi, Natália, tudo bem?
Tudo bem, você? Queria que você contasse, Yuri, um pouco para a gente do que é o MIT, né? E dessa nossa parceria também, e da palestra que a gente vai trazer hoje.
Claro, eu conto sim, Natália. Obrigado pelo convite aí, de estar hoje com vocês mais uma vez no B2W Summit. Bom, a todos os participantes hoje aí, é um prazer estar com vocês mais uma vez. Estou falando aqui de Boston, Estados Unidos, do MIT. Eu sou um dos diretores do MIT ILP, que é um time do MIT que desenvolve parcerias com grandes empresas no mundo inteiro. A B2W é um dos nossos parceiros, um dos nossos membros, né, como a gente chama. Estamos falando de mais ou menos 250 membros no mundo inteiro, empresas grandes, importantes, como a B2W, como a Vale no Brasil, como a Apple, como a Samsung, como várias outras, como a Nissan, e muitas empresas que, dessas 250, se eu mencionar 200 aqui, vocês reconheceriam. São grandes empresas, e é uma alegria para a gente ter a B2W como uma dessas empresas. Nós estamos trazendo hoje, então, para falar, representando o MIT, né? Hoje o tema vai girar em termos de dados, de data, de analytics, né? A gente está trazendo o Ronnie Schuritz. Eu vou agora aqui, então, então, muito importante, pessoal, umas coisas mais logísticas aqui da apresentação. A apresentação hoje vai ser feita em inglês, tá? O Ronnie está falando diretamente da Alemanha, está tarde para ele lá, deve ser o quê? Umas 11 da noite, quase lá para ele. Apesar da apresentação ser feita em inglês, vocês podem mandar as perguntas em português no chat do YouTube, que a gente vai traduzir tudo para o Ronnie aqui, não se preocupem, então, pode mandar as perguntas, né? Eu vou fazer a apresentação inicial em português, depois de uma apresentação do Ronnie em inglês, passo a bola para ele, e aí ele segue. Deixa eu só, então, aqui, ler para vocês um pouquinho rápido, um breve currículo do Ronnie. Então, o Ronnie Schuritz, que é o nosso palestrante de hoje, ele é o cofundador e co-CEO da Prenode. A Prenode é uma empresa que fornece soluções de inteligência artificial para o desenvolvimento e gerenciamento de machine learning em fonte de dados descentralizadas. Antes da Prenode, o Ronnie foi pesquisador nosso aqui do MIT, no Centro de Pesquisa de Sistemas de Informação, que a gente chama de CISR, C-I-S-R, aqui no MIT Sloan, e também foi líder do laboratório de pesquisa e professor no KIT, que é uma conhecida escola de tecnologia na Europa, onde até hoje ele ainda dá aula, o Ronnie dá aula dos seguintes cursos: serviços digitais, modelos de negócios e transformação. Antes disso, ele trabalhou na IBM como consultor de estratégia sênior e esteve envolvido na execução de vários projetos de transformação orientados à estratégia e tecnologia para clientes em todo o continente, estou falando especificamente da Europa. A palestra do Ronnie hoje, como vocês estão vendo o título da lei, um outro título que a gente tinha pensado era Transformando Produtos e Serviços com Dados e Analytics. Eu vou agora, então, peraí. Natália, você pode trazer o Ronnie, então? Hey, Ronnie, how are you? Thanks for joining.
Hi, Harry. Hi, Hi, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Ronnie. So Ronnie, I just made an introduction. I just introduced you in Portuguese, as you may have, imagined. So what I'm going to do now, I will introduce you in English, and then the mic will be yours so that you take it over and start your presentation. So I told the folks here that they can make questions, and then we're going to stop halfway through for questions. Pessoal, então eu estou passando agora, estou mudando a apresentação para inglês. Eu vou apresentar o Ronnie em inglês, vou passar a bola para ele, então. So, in English now, so Ronnie Schuritz is the co-CEO and co-founder of Prenode. Prenode is a company that provides AI solutions for the development and management of machine learning and decentralized data sources. Before Prenode, Ronnie was a research fellow at the Center for Information System Research, we call it CISR, at the MIT Sloan School of Management. and the research lab leader in lecture at the KIT, a known technology school in Europe, where, by the way, he still teaches classes on digital services, business models, and transformations. As I told you guys in Portuguese, Ronnie also worked for IBM. In his time at IBM, Ronnie was a senior strategy consultant and was involved and executed multiple strategy and technology-driven transformation projects for clients all over the continent. So, folks, Ronnie then will start his presentation. We decided to call it Enriching Products and Services with Data and Analytics. So as you see, Ronnie will break like in two parts. First of them, more, a little bit more on the business side. The second part on targeting more the technical folks. So again, feel free to ask questions at any time through the chat. And Ronnie, the mic is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Yuri. Thanks for the introduction. Let me present my screen. Yeah, like Yuri said, I will basically split up my presentation in two parts. The first part, I will really want to highlight on how today we use analytics and also data to enrich our products and service offerings to create more value to customers. But then in the second half, I wanted to look at some of the new machine learning trends and what's going on and how can we actually enrich products and services when we don't have all that customer data that we need. So that's when it gets a little bit more technical. The first half is actually based on a lot of the research we have done at MIT CISR and a lot of the surveys we have conducted there. So this is more based on research, and then the decentralized machine learning, the second part, it really is a more overview of the technical aspects of machine learning and the possibilities we have, especially if we cannot centralize huge amounts of data. So having said that, I'll just dive right in. And like you highlighted, we'll make a little break in the middle so you have the chance to ask questions more on the business side before we move into the more technical part of it. So let me start off right with a question. I mean, how do companies today generate return of investment from their data? Something that companies have been trying for quite a long time, and since information systems really came along, they try to monetize their data, try to monetize on the data they have. And something that has really started early on is that they try to make better decisions based on data. They try to build the decision support systems in order to maybe decide where to put the next retail store, in order to make better decisions in terms of investments, in terms of product developments, and all of that. So it was mainly driven in providing data to decision makers, and the challenges around the IT systems were to get that data in time, and then after some time put additional statistical methods on top to actually create insights out of that data. Then when we started researching the topic really a couple of years back, some kind of new trend back then came up, and that was the idea that we should sell data. There's this really famous saying, data is the new oil. And everyone thought, we have so much data, we should sell it. And at the beginning, that almost felt like, like a summer sale or something. Everyone tried to sell off their data. This became, after some time, more and more sophisticated. And one of the examples I really like is the one of Telefonica. I know for one watching in Brazil, Telefonica is there very well known for Vivo. Telefonica in general, telecommunication company, they also provide services here in Germany. And a couple of years back, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, Telefonica thought, we also need to monetize our data. Now, because of their telecommunication network, they do have data around, where people at. They can approximate the location of every person in their network. And of course, they have other, data around that person, so they can use that as well. Now, what Telefonica thought is, they're not just selling that data, because, you know, most of that data is also sensitive, but they could offer services around that. So that is how data monetization also became more and more sophisticated. So they created a spin-off called the Telefonica Next, and that was here in Germany. And they provided services based on their data. For instance, and what you see here is a chart actually from that project back then. They helped cities like the city of Stuttgart, which is located in the south of Germany. They helped these cities for large events, for large feasts. They helped them to predict the amount of people that would come to that event. So for any public event, they could predict pretty well, you know, how many people would come to that event, and then the city could plan their metro capacity around that. So if it's raining, Telefonica could tell you, you know, that's the amount of people that are coming to the event. So it sounds great. However, Telefonica Next just closed down last year. Not every company was successful in selling data or offering new services, because it's quite difficult. Yes, data can provide a lot of value to companies. Not everyone should sell it though. So one of the ways in really gaining value out of data came up, and we called it wrapping, to wrap data. And the idea here is really that you wrap your product with data and analytics. You add additional value to your customer. So you combine the data you might already have and add it to your product and create value to your customer. Now, the really big difference here is when you do improving, you're trying to use your data so you can make better decisions. But when you do wrapping, you help your customers make better decisions. One of the first examples that we found was actually FedEx. You know, when FedEx introduced package delivery tracking back in the 80s, that's exactly what they did. So they had the data on where the packages are located, and they started to provide that data to their customers. Something that today everyone expects to happen. Now, since the 80s, of course, a lot of things have happened. And Rolls-Royce, for example, nowadays, they're really well known for their service business model around power by the hour. But what they are also really good at is data and analytics. And they started to use the capabilities they have in providing additional services to their customer. And a couple of years back, they started offering a new software called Visium Fuel. And Visium Fuel would tell the clients of Rolls-Royce how much fuel they have consumed with their Rolls-Royce engines, how much fuel they would presumably use in the next year, and they try to help the customer in making better decisions around their logistics and optimizing their routes in order to save fuel, because of course fuel is one of the main drivers of cost in the airline industry. So since FedEx come today to Rolls-Royce, a lot of things have happened that actually enabled the sophistication of wrapping. Of course, there's more data, we all know that, but also the quality of data has changed. Data is not just manually put into systems, but it's based on sensor data and embedded systems. So it gives a much better picture of the real world. And of course, the technology to analyze that data has changed, and we have much more skills in order to gain insights out of that data. So when we look into these different ways of monetizing data, just a little information on that. When we look into the return on investment, that kind of splits 50% into approving, 24% in selling, and then 26% in wrapping. Now, the interesting thing here is that when you do selling, that's a completely new business, new market, new customers. When you do improving, it's internal, and you try to reduce cost. With wrapping, it's actually top-line growth you're creating for customers, which from your customers, which is great. So, but what I really want to talk to you about is how do you design these enrichments, these wraps? How do you add data and analytics to your products? And something that might help us to get ideas is something we already know from data-driven decision-making, from analytics. Some of you might have seen that already, something that is sometimes referred to as the data value chain. Some of my colleagues at MIT CISA, Barbara Wixom, has developed that quite a while back. And it's great. And it tells you when trying to make better decisions with data within your organization internally, usually you go through these 3 steps. You try to get hands on the data, right? You first of all need to establish some kind of data platform. You need maybe build a data lake, get all that data. But once you have the data is only worth something if you really get insights out of that data. Now, having that insight might help a decision maker make better decisions, but the business value is not realized until you really make the decision. So that's the basic idea of the data value chain. Now, we can actually use that, and we see that when we look into wrapping and we look into the idea of enriching our products with new features, because companies go along that value chain as well. So what they do is first of all, they start to provide their customer with data that they already have, like FedEx did. They had the location data of the packages. So they started to provide that data to their customers. Of course, that means you really need to be really good with the data quality, right? When starting to provide data to your customers, that's a totally different ballgame than using data internally. We all know that at the beginning, when starting to use data for decision making, data quality is not where it should be. And internally, people will just work around that. Once you provide that data to your customer, the customer won't excuse bad data quality. He will lose trust. So providing that data to your customer, this first step is it is a tough one, definitely. Well, once you provide data to your customer, you still rely on your customer to really gain these insights. So you might provide them with reports and dashboards. Banks might, and we know that from banks for a long time, they provide us bank statements of all our transactions online. Well, the next step is really to provide insights based on that data to your customer, providing them with maybe benchmarks. I just talked about a bank, and BBVA, for example, they have a point of sale solution that they offer to retail stores. Now, a retail store, when using this solution from BBVA, can see all the transactions, all the customers that have been to their stores and purchased something. But the information they also get is benchmarks on how do they perform against other retailers in their city, in their neighborhood. So they're not just providing the total sum of revenue the retail store has generated over the last weeks, but it also shows them, what does it mean and how does it compare? So to create more value to their customer by actually adding that additional insight. Of course, they still rely on the customer to make then the right decision, and that's why the last step of it, really great enrichments, they actually inspire action. So they're creating that value to the customer by automatically changing something in the product in a favorable way for the customer, or they try to help the customer make that decision to actually realize that value. So companies who started with these product enrichments, they generated values in all kinds of different ways. Some of them aimed to increase customer satisfaction. Some of them even realized additional revenue streams and increased their wallet share with their customers, or they even tapped into new revenue streams. But what's really fascinating is that companies, and that is based on our survey that we've done, is that when you look into the companies who do that really great, who introduced really fantastic new features, they achieved a return on investment, an average on 61%, which whoever has done IT projects knows that 61% for an IT-related project is great. It's fantastic return on investment. So I want to share something with you. Of course, when we saw that some of these companies, they really outperformed the rest and they really did a great job, we wanted to see what is different about their features and services. How did they use data and analytics differently? And we found four insights that I want to share with you. One characteristic of their, well, first of all of these services who performed great, they were more useful to the customers and they were more engaging. And they shared four, let's say their design characteristics. First of all, they were adaptive. So they adapted to each and every customer. They were not generic one-size-fits-all services, but because of the data they had, they provided individual data, or they adapted the service based on location-based data. They were anticipative, so they used predictive technologies to anticipate what the customer might need next and anticipate that and provided that feature beforehand. And they were advisive. Like I said, a low maturity design feature is it's just providing data to the customer. But when you really want to provide insights and you want to advise the customer on what to do, that's where you create a lot of value. And then last characteristics are some of the great reps that we've seen shares. They are acting. And this might be the toughest one. So they start to act on behalf of the customer, which is quite tough because your customer actually needs this level of trust that you can actually act for him. To make that a little bit more practical and concrete, I want to share with you an example of a company we've been working with and we've interviewed a couple of years back, and which I still love and I'm still fascinated about them. And the company is Cochlear. And Cochlear, just a little bit on a background, Cochlear is an Australian-based company. They're located in Sydney. They're actually a market leader in hearing implants. And what's so fascinating about them is just the way they use data and analytics and how innovative they are. They've actually, they were named one of the most innovative companies in the world by Forbes a couple of years back. And what you see on this little picture is a new product. It's the Nucleus 7. And what's so great about the Nucleus 7 is, when it comes to hearing implants, you need to do a lot of configuration. So you can always, hear best, because you need a different configuration when you are, let's say, in a quiet room and you just talk to one person, or if you're on a busy street and there are a lot of cars driving by and you try to talk to someone. So in all of these situations, you need different kinds of settings. So that can be a little bit tough. You sometimes have these little remotes and you need to do the configuration. And it's tough because sometimes you do the wrong configuration or you simply forget to change it. So what Cochlear introduced was a feature where the Nucleus 7 automatically changes based on the environment you're in. And I want to share with you some of the insights of how they've done it. First of all, they build a lot of customer intimacy in order to really understand the customer, understand how the customer is using the product, and what analytic feature really adds the most value. They could use because their hearing implant is a medical product, they had clinical trials, and they could use these clinical trials to really talk to their customer and try out different features. So they could really build this relationship to customers, really get into the understanding of what the customer needs. And what's also interesting about it is when we usually talk about data and analytics and building these great algorithms that enrich these products, we think about the IT department and we think about the data science department. But in this case, what we've seen is it's a really close collaboration between the product management and the data science department. It's the product managers who need to understand how do we use machine learning in this context and how can that add value to the customer? Because the product manager is the one that knows the customer and who can actually bring the needs of the customer and the possibilities of machine learning together. What they've also done is in the last years, they invested heavily in their analytics department and in their analytics capabilities. So of course they needed to develop the scene classifier algorithm that determines the situation the person is in right now. And that's quite a tough one because you need to get to a level of confidence that is high enough that you actually roll it out to customers. And they partnered also with Apple to actually get a hand on connection to the iPhone and collect the data they need. All right. So before I move on, because in the second half of the talk, I really would like to talk a little bit about the analytics and how we use sophisticated machine learning for these products. I would like to give everyone the chance to ask some questions.
All right. Okay. So Ronnie, our first question would be: everything you showed, looks fantastic. So data wrapping, you see how outstanding it is. The question then is why there are not that many companies doing it. They're not ready. They don't have the data. They have what they don't know. And I'm sure that there's a ton of companies out there with a massive amount of data. So why we don't see much more companies doing data wrapping than we actually do?
Yeah, fantastic questions. And actually, there's not just one answer to that. But the easiest and straightforward answer is it's just not that easy.
Okay.
It's not that easy. I mean, first of all, there are a lot of different challenges to it, and just want to highlight some. First of all, you really need to know what are the features you want to bring to your customer. We see companies adding features to products along the entire customer journey. You really need to understand what are the decisions the customer needs to make when using your product. Mm-hmm. Which of these decisions are the toughest ones, and which of these decisions can you support with that data? And building that customer intimacy to find that out, that's quite challenging for some of the companies. And then second, building the analytic skills, building scalable analytic systems that roll out machine learning to a lot of customers. That's another ballgame as well.
All right. And is this something that, so the companies who are having a hard time to do this, is this something, since people here don't know a lot about your company, about your business, is this something that Prenode can help them do, or not exactly?
Yeah, well, I will talk about that in the second half a little bit.
Okay.
And actually, when you want to add data and analytics to your product, you have different options, right? I mean, on one side, you can look into the data that you have. Maybe you have data that could add value to the customer, and you try to add that. So that's one possibility. But then there's this other possibility where you want to enrich the product with machine learning features. So basically using algorithms to do something for the customer. In that case, you need customer data.
All right.
And if the customer is not willing to give you that data, that's what we help you with. And
Okay.
I'll show you that.
All right. And then before we go to the second half, Ronnie, so the question is, okay, you show that, that striking number of something around, 61% of ROI. So the question is, do you see in your research, have you seen companies that on doing the data wrapping, they decide to offer this the data to the customers, but charging them for this data? I understand that most of them do not charge for this, and they benefit in somewhere else. But have you seen companies which charge for the data wrapping to provide to their users?
Right. So what we see is, first of all, those companies that create this very high return on investment, from the beginning, they know how they want to make money with that. So they make that decision very early on.
Okay.
And like you said, there are companies who just offer that for free. And that's fine if that's their strategy. So they offer that for free and they aim to increase their sales of their core product. But there are a lot of companies who actually charge for it. And there are different ways of doing that. It's by either increasing the price of the core product to earn some money with the feature, but you could also add additional revenue streams, for instance, an add-on subscription service and so on to your product. The difficult thing is it needs to fit to your customer, needs to fit to your product and to your product profit formula. So finding the right way, it's quite a tough one.
Okay, all right. So thanks, Ronnie. So back to you. Let's go to the second half.
All right, cool. Yeah, I talked about how we add data and analytics to products and services. And of course, something that became more and more important for every one of us, and we know that, is machine learning. So not just using data or statistical methods, but using methods of machine learning. Within that survey, when we just look into the features and services that are already live, so we surveyed altogether over 500 product managers. But when we look just into the ones that are already live on the market and they're already generating revenue, 69 of them, they use machine learning, 172 not yet. And when we even look into the ones that are a little bit older and they've been a little bit maturer, only 24% of them use machine learning. But we see that it is becoming more and more relevant and more increasing. So especially the new features, they use more machine learning, and the ones that are not live yet, a lot of them are trying to use it. So something I want to talk about is, how do we use machine learning when our customers have their data in their possession and it's spread across different customers? So what we usually see when companies want to enrich their products with machine learning, they need access to data. That's why you train your machine learning models on. So let's say you want to do any kind of prediction, doesn't matter what, maybe a sales forecast, maybe a predictive maintenance solution. The data that you need is spread across different local systems, spread across different customers. And now you need to get your hold on that data to really develop a model. So I want to show some of the options that we've seen companies using in order to cope with that. First of all, well, you could train isolated models. That means for each and every company, for each and every customer, and this is mainly done in, of course, in the B2B context, when you have large clients, when you sell machineries or equipment, you do an isolated model for each and every customer. Of course, the downsides to that approach is clear that, first of all, in every local environment, you might not have enough data, not enough observations to really develop a model that is good enough. So that reduces already your capability to develop a model, and it's also very inefficient, right? Because you need to reinvent the wheel every time. So what companies do in that approach, they try to collect all that data, right? They try to tap into each and every customer local system, and they collect all that data, centralize all that data. And this is what we see mostly, what many companies do, try to build that the big data lake, try to collect as much data as possible. Now, while everyone is doing that, it doesn't mean it is the most easiest and the most straightforward way, because there's more and more this trend towards that customers just don't want to share their data. There's more sensitivity on sharing data, and sometimes in certain contexts, like in medicine or especially in industrial machinery industries, customers are not willing to share that data anymore. And when it comes to medicine, image data, or also to industrial machinery sensor data, sometimes data is just too large to centralize all of it and to transfer all of that data. Something that we've also seen, it's not that popular for using in product enrichments, but I still want to show it, but because it is done. You could also try to generate synthetic data. That means based on the insights you have for each and every customer, you create, based on the data they have, you create synthetic data that helps you to increase the volume of data you have to train a machine learning model that is better than which one that you would have without. This method is not without its risks. If you do so, there's this risk of that you introduce biases to your model, because you have a small amount of data and you replicate that data, or you synthesize that data to a large amount. So you could introduce a bias that was already in that data. And of course, what you really need to have in that situation, you need to have an understanding of how the real data that is already with that customer is distributed, and how it is, how is it composed in order to create synthetic data that is very close to it. But something I want to share with you, and what I really believe can totally change the game in that regard, is the idea of changing that paradigm. So instead of sending around data, centralizing data, collecting huge amounts of customer data, we use the model in itself. So there's this new trend of decentralized machine learning that you can use to develop your machine learning models on. And the idea here is that, yes, for every customer, you do develop an individual model, but then you transfer these models and you combine all these different models and you fuse them together. So what you basically do is, for instance, you average the weights of the neural network, and you use that new neural network and play it back to the customer, to the local IT system, and you retrain it on that in that local environment. And that is something that goes on for a couple of times until you really reach a model that is sophisticated enough. Now, the fantastic thing about that approach is that you create a model that is capable and that is trained on larger amounts of data. But at the same time, you do not need to centralize customer data. You do not need to collect all of your customer data in order to create a model. Now, there are different techniques in order to do that. Something that is shown here on the left, something called federated machine learning. Federated machine learning was first introduced by Google, who used it for their keyboard predictions on their Android phones. And this is mainly using an average approach where they average the weights. But there are also other methods. And I just want to show you one of the projects that we actually have done with federated learning. And So in that example, we work together with an ERP provider that provides an ERP software for restaurant chains. So there were different restaurant chains, and just here in the example, it was a big Japanese restaurant chain selling things like sushi and so on. And there was a second chain with an Italian chain. So when we needed to develop a sales forecast model because these restaurants, they need to forecast sales in order to plan their inventory and also to plan their staff. And the data that they have is just sometimes not good enough to train a machine learning model within a single entity. So we used federated learning to, and the method I just shown to you, to combine the models of each and every restaurant and train a machine learning model that then can be redistributed to everyone. And what you see in the down in the right is also comparison of different methods. Like I said, there are different methods you can use. Federated learning approach, where all the models are combined and the weights of the neural net are averaged. But there are also other methods like a sequential transfer. In a sequential transfer, you don't combine all these models and fuse them, but you transfer the models entity by entity. So this is another approach of decentralized learning. And you can see that in this sequential steps, you can actually reach much better performance. So what we've seen here in the table is the mean absolute percentage error. Those of you who work with machine learning will recognize that, and you want to have a very low number. Your error should be very low. So these decentralized machine learnings are really something new that is becoming more and more popular, especially when you can't access customer data or your customer doesn't want you to give you the data. Of course, it's not without its challenges. It's not the easiest way to approach machine learning. First of all, you do have a distributed information system, right? I mean, all of a sudden, you don't have just your central analytics platform, but you do have all these local IT systems that you kind of need to coordinate. You need to be aware that these local systems might do something else right now. So you need to be aware of how much pressure you can put on them with the local machine learning. And all of a sudden, you need not just to manage your local models, but you need to manage all these decentralized models. You need to deploy them on all these different systems. And you need to have, you of course, have another complexity when it comes to security. So what I want to close is with, just want to give you a little link what we do at Prenode. For all of these challenges, we developed MLX. MLX is a federated, or it's a decentralized machine learning solution that helps you to train machine learning models on decentralized data. So all of the challenges I've shown you, MLX is taking that over for you, and it helps you to develop machine learning models on the edge for your customer, individualized for each and every customer, and then the system fuses all these models from these different customers together and redistributes them to your customers. And it's all based on the idea that it's easy integratable with your product and your service. So it's built on REST APIs, supports REST APIs, and it's completely Dockerized, so it can be integrated in your product. So that I just wanted to highlight that, so you also have an idea of what I'm doing. All right. So that was the main part of the presentations, and I'm really looking forward to questions, especially to the last part, to the decentralized machine learning.
All right. So before question about the second part of decentralized machine learning, a comment from the attendants, that is, so from Camila Santamaria. Camila says, there's a current trendy role of data translator, which means professionals to bridge the gap between product development and data science. Because today we have this thing, it's really like, you see, it's super trending. Everybody's talking about, product development and especially data science. What Camila is saying, and again, this is not a question, just a comment in case you have any comments, Ronnie, about this data translator, someone who's like in between, understands what comes from product managers and then translate it to the data science side. It's just a comment.
Yeah, and I just to add on, it's a fantastic comment, because when you do product enrichments, you need to rethink your organization. You cannot think in these typical silos. You need to think in terms of, what do we add to the customer and what departments need to work together. And it's data and analytics, it's the data science department, it's the IT department, it's the service department, and so on and so on. Tough one.
All right. Okay. And then a question now is still about the first part. So from the same,
that's cool.
From Camila, how do companies go from basic data literacy to data wrapping? You can see the question there.
Right. So I've shown this idea of the data value chain and moving from providing data to the customer and adding insights and then taking these actions. So what really, if you want to take away something, and what we've seen from these companies, they did two major things. One, they built the customer intimacy. They strategically looked into, does our product management know what decisions our customer makes? And how do we get that information? How do we build this relationship to the customer via maybe digital channels to collect more data about the customer or other ways? And then the second, building analytics skills, building that data literacy. That's a whole topic in itself, right? One thing that I want to highlight is, on one side, yes, you need to build these strong data science communities within an organization. There are different approaches to that, either very strong analytical units, central units, or distributed units, and you need to build that skill. But you also need to educate everyone else in the organization. So also a product manager needs to be able to tell you what is possible with machine learning. And there are some great articles about building an organization to become more data-driven, and I can share that with you as well. But this is, I could probably talk an hour just on that topic alone.
Next time then. So, about the data, Ronnie, so how do you label data?
Right. Right. So when it comes to decentralized machine learning, data labeling is one of the biggest issues, because you don't have access to local data, right? You don't have access to the data, and you don't have that centralized, and you cannot label it. That means right now what we see in the market is that when using decentralized machine learning, it is mainly used for machine learning problems that are not based on labeled data, that don't require labeled data, because it's kind of automatically labeled, like the sales data. But some of the trends that come up is that you try to use the customer to label that data. So every time you're very unsure about something or something interesting come up, you ask the customer, you ask that local system to do the labeling. So you move also into a decentralized labeling. This is quite new, not very common, but it's starting to get there.
Okay, so next is, oh yeah, the user who asked the question said, well, she would heavily appreciate those articles. In case if you can share with me later on, Ron, I'd be happy to talk to the B2W folks and get to her. So another question about decentralized machine learning, Ron. You showed the example of the two restaurant chains, like the Japanese and Italian. And some could say, oh man, but Italian food and Japanese food have nothing in common. However, both are like restaurant chains. It's food and food. The question is, how similar or how different should customers they have to be so that you can have a decent or an efficient result on your.
Right. Absolutely. I get the question. Here's the thing. Usually what you would expect when you hear about decentralized machine learning is that all of your customers, they need to be very homogeneous, right? They need to be quite the same. Well, actually, that is not the case. When we started off with that project, a lot of people believed that it is not possible to do a sales forecast model for an Italian restaurant and a sushi restaurant. But still, it was possible because the underlying effects that affect a restaurant and why people go to a restaurant, like for instance, weather, like certain weekdays and so on. These rules kind of hold the same for everyone. So when using these decentralized approaches like federated machine learning, you use that underlying assumptions and you use the underlying phenomena. And just to highlight, we were able, for the single restaurants, for the Japanese restaurants, to create sales forecast models that are better when we included the Italian restaurants, and they were better than if you just developed isolated models. Okay. So restaurant, there is a certain heterogeneity around these local systems, and that's all right.
Okay, all right. So that said, Ronnie, yeah, I think we're coming to the end, perfect timing. And so so you stick around, let me just make a comment in Portuguese and I'll be back with you in English.
All right.
Pessoal, mudando pouquinho aqui do inglês para o português. Alguns pessoas perguntaram, esse vídeo vai estar disponível depois, a B2W vai disponibilizar o vídeo depois de alguma edição, para aqueles que não puderam assistir hoje ou querem compartilhar com alguém, quiserem assistir depois. A gente agradece mais uma vez, em nome do MIT, pela participação de todos vocês. Muito obrigado à B2W mais uma vez pelo convite. A B2W, então, de novo, é parte de um grupo muito especial de membros do MIT, de parceiros do MIT. O Ronnie apresentou a empresa hoje que foi a Rolls-Royce, que é um parceiro nosso, tem ASICS, Nissan, Apple, Samsung, B2W e muitos outros, 250 empresas no mundo inteiro. Então é uma alegria ter a B2W como um dos nossos parceiros aí. Obrigado pelo convite. Então agora eu vou mudar para inglês e voltar a bola para o Ronnie. So Ronnie, thank you so much for your lecture. You're really, a natural presenting, man. I know it's virtual thing, but yeah. And thanks. It's over 11 p.m. there in Germany. Thanks for being up, that late. Thanks a lot for the presentation. Really added when we were discussing B2W. So which, topics or themes or presenters they wanted. When I show them what your work, they were, immediately interested. So thanks a ton for presenting. And then the mic back to you in case you have any final comments to the audience. And thanks again.
Well, thanks for having me. And it doesn't matter if it's that late. I always love to talk about data and analytics. So if you have any questions left that I have not answered, doesn't matter if it's about the product enrichment and the design of data-driven organizations on the decentralized machine learning, just hit me up either via LinkedIn, just send me a request or drop me an email and I'll get back to you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ronnie. Natalia, back with you. Natalia?
Oi, voltei. Queria agradecer todo mundo, Rony, Yuri, thank you. Até a próxima. Esse conteúdo vai ficar disponibilizado, sim, para todo mundo que quiser assistir. Depois a gente manda de novo o link para quem não conseguiu assistir. A Camila fez uma última pergunta, mas, Camila, a gente vai direcionar para o Rony e a gente depois te envia. Então, queria agradecer todo mundo. Para quem não está acompanhando, a gente ainda tem uma grade com bastante conteúdo de tecnologia. A gente vai até o final do mês com esses conteúdos. Queria agradecer muito, Yuri, de novo, você e toda a parceria que a gente tem, por trazer também grandes assuntos, né, grandes temas para a gente discutir aqui. Muito obrigada, e ano que vem a gente se vê presencialmente, né?
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Natalia, Ronnie. See you guys next time. Take care. Bye.